Call to order the special board meeting for the Woodford County Board of Education. This is our special board planning meeting. Thank you. Let the record show that all members are present. First on the agenda, we have our instructional equity update. Mr. Ryan, or is that right?
Yes, pretty limited, obviously. We have a number of instructional plans coming up, but everything is pretty much on hold at this point. Specifically, some writing training we have coming up next week with our high school and middle school, obviously holding that. And then big plans with our equity work, which we'll talk in more detail later. In terms of our next steps with that is the cultural intelligence assessment for all of you, as well as our equity team, as well as our principals and the teacher leaders that they've identified. We're scheduled to do that. The assessment opens up the week of April 13th. It's an online assessment, and then followed up by the interpretation workshop. But I guess we'll just talk more detail this evening.
Yeah, during the discussion,
yeah.
If you want to kind of lay it out then, or now, either one.
Let me grab my notes.
Okay.
So what that entails, the assessment part is pretty easy. You'll do that independently, just through a link that I would email out. The more complicated part is the interpretation workshop, and I don't know if you relayed to them, just trying to figure that out logistically in terms of not having all the board together, as that would be a special call. They are 4-hour workshops, so what we're looking at right now would be that 2 sessions on Monday, the 20th. The first session would be of April. First session from 8 to 12, the second session 12:30 to 4:30, and then one session the following day on April 21st from 8 to 12 in the morning. So having 3 sessions would allow us to divvy up 2, 2, and 1, so therefore, avoiding the special called meeting. There are other options we can consider, but if you want to just wait to the discussion.
And I know this was in the discussion item, but yeah, I guess the only thing, I'm kind of split, jumping to the discussion. Did you mention that maybe Ambrose could be in the one with the equity team? Is that one of these dates that he listed? So he would be the one on its own?
Yeah.
And then the other 4 of us, we just need to kind of sign up what's most convenient for us.
That would seem logical, but still, you'd have to just make sure that 2, 2, and 1 across those 3.
Right. Yep. We can work that out amongst ourselves. So.
And obviously, though, as the issues with the COVID-19 develop, they may not want us to be in groups that large. And so Dr. Banks may want to hold on that. So I think we will have to kind of see how things unfold. I think we need to make plans if that were to occur. But I think we need to be prepared for it to be potentially moved or done at a different time, depending on how things.
Right, that was the recent communication with Dr. Banks between her and I, just emailing, let's go ahead and set a plan. And then obviously.
Were there other things, I can't remember and I think you shared it with us, other things happening before this assessment that are going to get pushed back, that may push all this back? I know she was making trips here.
Yes, we just met last week with her coaching with the team. It would push back. The part of the action plan is our culturally responsive visuals in the schools. So the next step that came out of meeting with the team last week was me bringing all those teachers back in that were part of that training to kind of take the next steps with those visual plans. I wanted to do that very soon, but obviously that's on hold as well.
Okay. That may be something you can do virtually.
True.
Okay. So I kind of jumped the gun with the discussion.
That's
are you going to, so you'll just send an email to all board members with these times and?
If we decide that's the go-ahead plan, then yes.
Well, yeah, and I'll just let you know, I've talked to Scott and Brian about this as we've tried to set it up. We could have had all 5 of us together at a separate thing, but that would have been a special board meeting. So we kind of weigh the options, and one of the benefits I thought Scott agreed was, to be in with the staff members, with us to be in there with although our role in this will be policy driven, that's what we could do. Still being in these individual things, as we come back to the board, we might, still gather some information to develop policies out of it.
Right.
So
Because
I don't know if
essentially,
anybody has any thoughts on that, but that was kind of the option, to have a separate, but it would be an open board meeting, we'd have a public hearing, and we would not have the benefit of being there with staff members.
right. Because essentially what we're trying to do is just build common understanding, common knowledge around being culturally responsive, kind of a baseline, so to speak, and at multiple levels. Board level, school level,
Right.
district level, school level.
So I don't know if any board members have any thoughts on that, or if that sounds fine with you, or?
I think we're gonna have to all be very flexible on everything.
Yeah,
Coming
Right.
up. Things are changing so fast right now that
well, I think just, the idea of doing it as a board solely, or splitting up the board with your district reports. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I talked to Scott quite a bit about it, and I think we both kind of thought this was the best idea, but I certainly, if a board member has a different opinion on that.
No, when I suggested that the board be involved with the equity work, it really was just so that we could have a cohesive community and that we could have top-down leadership involvement, that we were all on the same page and that we all support the work, the equity work. So just that we're involved, I think that's the perfect way of doing it. That sounds fine.
Great.
Again, thank you.
So it sounds like for 4 of us, Ambrose will have his with whenever the equity team is.
Right.
But the rest of us kind of need to think about the 20th or the 21st.
Correct. So those would be the 2 days. There'll be
Okay.
2 sessions on the 20th and the morning session on the 21st.
Okay, so kind of just think about that. We've
Is
got
the equity team going to be split, right, or is it going to be
and
all
it's, what date
together?
is it?
It would be one of those. I would assume that they'll be split. We hadn't really talked about the makeup beyond how we're going to split up the board.
Okay.
So that'll be my next step with
So
her.
just make sure he's mainly with the equity team.
Yes.
Since he's- And then once you decide what date that is, then that will leave the other 2 for the 4 of us to see what's best for us. But we've got
That's
2
right.
months
Well,
notice
if it
either,
makes it-
so.
if it makes it easier, I can go with the equity team and do that, and there's just 3. I mean,
And we can't have 3.
You still have to go, it's still 2, 2.
Yeah, so Ambrose will be the one with the equity team, and the rest of us will split up between the other 2. So we've got 2 months notice. We
So
can-
I've got some office time. I'll work on that.
Yeah, so, all right.
But yeah, we've talked through with the board, how to do that, and I feel like multiple times, we always kept coming back to that, the whole
Right.
2-2-1, so I feel like
Yeah.
that is the best
So I
option.
kind of said that, but if anybody does have an objection to that, we'd rather do it as a board, I'd like to hear it now. Okay,
Very good.
Great.
I will send that out.
okay, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Okay, the next thing on the agenda, we have a regular agenda item, discussion and potential action related to out-of-state travel. Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Ms. Evelyn. As you know, we do have a number of out-of-state trips coming up over the next several weeks, and as things have unfolded over the last few days, there have been some very strong recommendations about any non-essential out-of-state travel, limiting that. And so what I would recommend for the board to do is to cancel any out-of-state travel at least until the end of April. And then that gives us some time to see how things progress. If we need to look at any May trips, I think we could do that at we might need to do it next week, depending on what we know. But at least through the end of April, I would recommend canceling any out-of-state travel. I did have the opportunity, I've talked with Mr. Bruno. Obviously, they've got a trip here at the middle school, and so they are working on some options for that. I did meet with all of the teachers and coaches who are leading those trips at the high school level last week to kind of let them know that the board would be making a decision this evening, but also what the governor and the health department have recommended, so that they can kind of begin making some preparations for that. The unfortunate thing is that some may be able to be rescheduled, some may not. And so that's the unfortunate thing. You know, for example, the junior trip to Washington, D.C. could potentially be rescheduled for the fall because those students will still be in school. And so that may be an option for them. However, the senior trip to New York City is probably not an option. And so that's the unfortunate part of this particular situation. But I don't think that we have much of a choice in terms of the decision regarding out-of-state travel.
Do you have, can we just kind of know what trips those are, just so?
Well, we've got Charleston here in the 8th grade, Charleston, South Carolina. You have the DC trip for 5th grade students, Simmons. You have the DC trip for juniors. You have the New York City trip. There is an FFA trip to Florida. There is baseball during spring break, softball during spring break. You have DECA, I think, was out of state.
Canceled.
I think it's been canceled.
That's been canceled.
And also, wasn't the HOSA?
That was state level. I think.
Okay, that's been canceled. So there are several involved in this.
And there was a Paris trip, which obviously.
That was
Yeah.
canceled because we didn't, you have a travel ban, so. I think they are looking at options on that one as well because the overwhelming majority of students on that trip were juniors. So they are looking to see if there is a possibility to potentially do that next spring.
And these are just out of state, or they're in-state travel that were?
There are some in-state trips. We actually have them on the board agenda to go ahead and approve in case we happen to be in school. If we are not in school, obviously, they would not take place, or they would, but we felt that it was best to go ahead and at least approve them so that we wouldn't be held up by needing to have a board meeting to approve those should we get back in school before those trips were to occur.
But we just assume they're canceled, that there's no school.
That is correct. Unless they could be moved until a time when
Well,
we
right,
could get
until
back
we
in
were
school.
in school.
Yes.
Okay. All right, does anybody have any questions?
I do have a question. What about refunding possibilities for those canceled trips?
The only thing we can do is try to work with the agencies that we've worked with who have helped us plan the trips. We're going to be somewhat dependent on funds that we can get back through them. This is an unprecedented situation, so I am very hopeful that those groups will work well with us to be able to get back as much as we can, as we possibly can.
Will we be updating different groups of parents as we hear from those groups?
Once a decision is made, and then those sponsors and chaperones can begin reaching out to.
Great.
Because it'll probably be trip by trip, right?
It will vary. And some of it will depend on if they can be rescheduled or not.
It'll be interesting to know, because I mean, with the pandemic, sometimes these natural disasters, you can get some travel and stuff from that. But
I am hopeful.
I'm hopeful too. Were you going to New York, Ryan?
No, I wasn't. I was just going to let some of my schoolmates.
Any other questions? So the motion we're looking here is,
The recommendation is to cancel all out-of-state travel, both student and staff, through the end of April. And then we will revisit any trips that may be occurring in May. I don't think we have any student out-of-state in May, but we do have some staff out of travel, or out-of-state travel in May.
so we need a motion for this? Or go ahead,
That's
Danny, I'm sorry.
another thing too, on all of the PD trips that have been approved that are canceled. I assume we're looking at refunds and all of that as well.
yes, we will more than likely be able to get refunds on registration. We'll have to be working with the airlines. We may not get a full refund, but we may be able to apply whatever we've done toward a trip
Right.
coming up. So we will be working on that once it's,
Can they extend that like a credit to the school, or is it to the individual?
it depends on who made the reservation.
I do think that most travel agencies are being extremely flexible right now. So that's a bonus, and hopefully we cannot have too much of a financial impact.
Everyone's living by the seat of their pants right now, so hopefully it'll all work out. All right, do we need a motion on this? or
Yes,
just-
we need a
Okay,
motion
so,
and a second.
do we have a motion? Okay. The motion is to,
Cancel all out-of-state travel from now through the end of
I have a
April.
motion to cancel all out-of-state travel, both student and staff, through the end of April.
okay.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Okay, now we'll go into our regular agenda. Mr. Hawkins, do you wanna-
Turn that over to Ms. Smith for her financial summary.
Okay, each of you should have a financial summary, which is our cash balances by fund for February 29th, 2020. Our general fund, we began with 11.4 million. Our revenues for the month were 3.1, expenditures 2.2, and ended the month with almost 3 million in our general fund. Our special revenue fund, we began with 21,000, revenues 438,000, expenditures 303,000, end the month with 156,000. Our district activity fund, we began with 586,000, our revenues 59,000, expenditures 70,000, ending balance 575,000. Within that is where we have our one-to-one insurance account. We began with 45,000, had $1,000 worth of revenues, a little over 2,000 in expenditures, and ended with 44,000. Our school activity fund, we began with 287,000, our revenues 67,000, expenditures 69,000, and ended the month with 284,000. Our capital outlay fund, we had no activity, so we began and ended the month with 180,000. Our building fund had no activity, so we began and ended the month with 1.1 million. Our construction fund, we began with 1.1 million, had interest for some of the SFCC projects of a little over $1,000, expenditures of 79,000, and ended the month with a little over $1 million. There were no debt service payments required in the month of February, so there was no activity in that fund. Our school food service, we began with 318,000, revenues 221,000, expenditures 208,000, and ended the month with 330,000. Our daycare operation, we began with 142,000, revenues 45,000, expenditures 40,000, and ended the month with 147,000. There was no activity in our community education fund, so we began and ended the month with 33,000. For a grand total, cash 15.2 million, revenues 3.9, almost 4 million, expenditures a little over 3 million, and ended the month with 16.2. Any questions?
Thanks, Amy.
All right. Just a note, we did, for next week's meeting, we did go ahead and cancel the student recognitions and student performance. Obviously, that will cut down on any crowd. So we're really forward with the meeting as it is currently scheduled. On the consent agenda, again, I'll go through some of these. The donations primarily, most all were monetary in nature for different either trips or projects that are coming up. Fundraisers, again, this is one where we wanted to go ahead and do approvals. Many of these were to occur April and May. We're not certain, obviously, on when school will resume, but if they are approved, then they can alter the date once we get back into school. So we just didn't want to be held up by waiting on a board meeting to approve those, so we would ask for your approval on those fundraisers. Same thing on travel requests. There are a couple, I think, that have been canceled out of this, but one is like the middle school cheerleaders, that's in the summer, but they wanted to go ahead and get approval. The high school trip to Spain, that is for next spring break, so spring of 2021. But again, any of these that would occur before the end of the school year are very much subject to whether we are in school or not. Contracts, we currently have one in your packet. We are awaiting some others. The first one is with the Kentucky Castle, and again, this one is, it's for the prom.
What is that date?
It's April 18th, and so we don't know about that right now. So we will have to be in contact with them on looking at other dates. The contract itself, though, would not change. The date might, but the contract itself, in terms of what everything that goes into that. And so we would ask for you to approve the contract. I'm going to hold off on signing it until we kind of know a little bit more, and we'll be in contact with the
And they're
Kentucky
working
Castle.
with us,
They've been
like
very-
we wouldn't have to lose a deposit if we
No.
could go on the 18th
No,
or
no,
anything like that. Okay, great. We should thank them publicly for that.
And again, we are waiting on a couple of other ones. I know one related to our athletic department, one with our copier, and then I think there may be one other one that we're still waiting on the lease agreement. I worked with Grant on that one. That was for the tennis courts. So we're still waiting on those three documents to get back, and hopefully we'll have those prior to next Monday.
Do we have a contract yet for the horse park?
Mr. Chenoweth is reviewing that. He works with all three districts that are, so,
Participating.
yep, so it's just a matter of him getting the language the way he wants it, because for whatever reason, all three contracts were a little different. And so he's working through that process with the horse park. And then we have a couple of grants that we are applying for, and so we'd ask for your approval on those.
One other question. On the donation request approvals,
Mhm.
some of those were for the DECA trip. How will we handle
Those were
refunding?
DECA state. State's already happened. The DECA trip coming up was nationals.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
All right, so that's the consent agenda. For the regular agenda, we have the notification of personnel matters. That's everything that has occurred since the last board meeting. Also, the payment of bills, notification of payment of bills. We split the meeting minutes up. February 6th, February 18th, February 24th can all be done as one item. All were present. Item D then would be separate for the March 3rd board meeting. That was the public forum. Item E is to authorize district staff to seek appraisal on a property between the South Side and Huntertown.
I have some questions about that one. Are we looking to sell this property? I'm just not sure why that's on as an action item. Did someone?
I don't.
I requested that we look at it to see what the value of the land is, because we don't know what it is.
So,
Just gathering facts.
so are we seeking to sell it or?
No, just to value it.
And so, I guess my thoughts on that would be, I'm not sure why we would pay for an appraisal if we're not actually looking to sell it right now. Can you speak about this item, Mr. Hawkins? I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, obviously, typically an appraisal is done if there's an interest, and I don't know if there is or not. So, I mean, I think the board can make that determination. I think just given the uncertainty with things right now, I don't know. I don't know if it's a good time or if it's a better time to wait. That's a hard one for me.
Well, this seems like one of the things that the board would need to kind of discuss and at least get some guidance on in an open meeting before we authorize paying for an appraisal. Just kind of discussing it a little bit, looking at the consequences of it.
Doing an appraisal, the consequences.
Well, it's not a free appraisal, so we would have to pay for it, number
Right.
one. But number two, we would have to look at the consequences of it. It's a good idea to try to sell that unit if there are any reasons that we might not want to, if that would cause some issues, that sort of thing. Just something that I feel like before we have a vote to spend money to do something, we should have a discussion about what we're doing and why we would want to do that. Just as a general practice, I think that's a good idea for any board or any group to kind of work through why you might want to make a decision or not, especially when there's money involved. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's something that would be a discussion item first, so that we would kind of talk through some of those things in open meeting before we, hired an appraisal and had this action.
Well, I think in our planning meeting, that's what we do, so we can talk about it now, because it's not going to be voted on until next year. So Danny has brought this.
I don't know if I specifically requested it as an action item, but in looking at different properties that the school owns, I can't see the flaw in finding out what the value of something is. Because if selling it would be a benefit to the schools, then I can't imagine why we wouldn't look at it.
Well, I think probably you would have to also look at the consequences of such an action, and so that would be something I think that we would need to discuss. Do you have any kind of information or any kind of ideas? Nobody's approached you about buying it. It just is something that you thought we should get an appraisal on?
No one has approached me about buying it.
Okay, well, I just wasn't sure. I'd never heard this item being discussed or brought up.
We discussed it in an executive session is what made me think about it, and I actually reached out to Mr. Hawkins to see if we had a value for it, and he said we didn't, so that's why I asked for it to be added to the agenda.
What is the land currently used for? Is it just a green space between two schools?
It is, it's a space that allows us really more of an emergency exit. If Huntertown, because Huntertown has one way in, one way out, same thing with Southside, the property sits in between the two campuses, so we could evacuate students out that way to get to the other site. So it does allow us the ability to exit students currently if there were to be a situation where either campus were to be closed.
Do Simmons or Northside have that privilege as well? I'm just thinking if we don't use it, why not appraise it and see if it is a value to sell? That only makes sense to me.
And is it really a viable escape route for our handicapped children? I mean, I've walked through there. I mean, it's over.
It's not a road.
No.
The last time I walked through it,
It's
was
a dirt path through a woods.
Right.
There's no chance you could get a wheelchair through there.
And I think there's an exit out of Huntertown through Derby Hills. You can go.
You can go at this, but and again, that's provided that Derby Hills is still open. That was the only thing if that area were to have. And again, I don't know how the property was purchased. I don't know when it was purchased.
The property in between and the property
Correct.
through Derby
And
Hills.
how big is it?
It's 22 acres.
Well, and two, I also think just given its location, you would really have to start thinking about if that property was sold and developed, what effect that would have on the number of students and on redistricting. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of discussions you want to have before you actually spend money to have the appraisal. That's just my thought. I just don't see if there's there's no plan on selling it, and there's no discussion about what the pros and cons would be, or what the consequences might be, that I'm just not sure why that would be, something that needs to be done urgently.
I think the appraisal would be a great idea. It'll give us the potential use for the land, it'll give us the value of the land. Right now, we know nothing about it. And it could positively impact future situations, future decisions that we make as a board moving forward. I think it's a great idea. I mean, that's just, I understand if you agree.
I don't think
We don't know the potential use, we don't know the value, we just have a piece of land that's sitting there.
And I don't think there was any urgency. It was just a normal request. I didn't say, let's do it immediately. I sent it a few weeks ago.
Like I said, I don't know, we've not had any open discussion about it. I mean,
That's what we're
we
doing
want
now.
to expend the money. I do think that it would be, wise to say that it's probably, anyone purchasing it in the area that it's in would be purchasing it to build homes of some sort. So I think it would be wise to kind of look at your numbers and see what effect that might have on the middle school and the elementary schools, and then just have discussions with folks about that could mean redistricting. So, if you're in the Colony or South Hill or Edina, that might mean you have a different elementary school now, because this is literally a house located right beside Cumbertown, right beside Southside. So I just think those are some discussions you want to have before you, I think it's always a good idea to plan and to have an idea of what you're doing before you move forward, especially when it involves, expending funds.
I think when people buy a home, and as a real estate professional, we don't ever guarantee a district for a home that anyone moves into. So for us to venture out and say that, this might be redistricting, that could happen any year, at any time. We don't ever guarantee someone, if they move into the North Side district, that's the school they're going to go to. So that's...
Well, that's not the realtor's job, but that's certainly the Board of Education's job. We
Well,
have to
right, but you
these
can't
schools, these
guarantee
neighborhoods.
where their district is going to be either.
But we
Neither
have
can
to
I.
plan, so that's what I'm saying, so we have to plan these things.
Which could happen every single year. Is that correct?
No,
It could
it
happen.
couldn't.
There is a potential every year of having to redistrict.
No,
There's not?
There's a
Okay.
plan so that we don't have to redistrict often.
That's
I mean,
right.
we
Do
didn't,
you
we've
think
only
we're
redistricted
facing
once since
redistricting?
I've been on the board. And when we did that, it was just a real process. So we planned early, we had meetings, we met with people. All I'm saying is, before you spend money for an appraisal, it seems like a good idea to discuss why, and also to discuss the uses, and also to discuss the consequences.
Ms. England, is that what we're doing tonight? Am I clear on that? That tonight is the discussion for that, and next week
Yes,
we'll
I
vote
think
on it?
planning meeting is where we do discuss these things that have been brought up on the
Okay.
agenda. I will say that the nature of this property has changed because of development around it. I remember in past boards, we talked about, there was probably no value to that land because there was no entrance to it. There was no, there was no way to get into it other than it was just a wooded path. With the development that's come up around it, I think the nature of it has changed. It may have some value now.
Well, and with the current budget issues that we're looking at, if we do have land that has value, I think we need to know that. I mean, you have discussed for months about the deficit that we're facing. If we have land that has value, let's have the facts available to make good decisions. I don't disagree that a lot further discussion needs to be had about selling
It's only for next week.
about
About
selling
Yeah, to
it,
have
but
it.
getting an appraisal is the first step in gaining more information.
And I guess what I'm saying is, first, I think you should get information, discuss it before you take the first step of spending the money on the appraisal. But the other thing is, just in general, I think that probably before we put items on the agenda, it might be a good idea to have that information from the superintendent and from the staff, to have those discussions about what the consequences are and what these things mean. And I don't know that just board members showing up at a meeting, a planning meeting, that we really have all of that kind of information. Again, I understand it's just an appraisal. All I'm saying is it's a good idea to plan things and to understand the consequences before you spend money.
Okay, what
And
kind
does
of,
that apply to all agenda items?
Well, this is the agenda item we're talking about.
No, I'm just asking if,
This is the agenda item we're talking about. I'm not
But
sure
do
what other
those-
future or agenda items you might be discussing. I feel like, we can move on. I just wanted to say, I feel like it would be nice to have a plan and discussion and open meeting about expenditures and about the consequences of those.
Did you
you ask a question of me?
Do you think it's likely that we are looking at redistricting in the
Yes.
next couple of years?
Yes.
Okay.
Does anybody have any idea, and maybe, and this would be something that we would need to have before we could vote on it, is the cost of the appraisal?
I think this is, that would be authorizing them to seek the appraisal because they couldn't get it.
So we wouldn't actually be voting on it, just to seek information about where it would be. So, Sherry, I'm just trying to understand everybody's position. So what kind of planning do you think would need to go in before we saw the appraisal? Like, do you think we need to have a buyer interested?
No, I think we would need to have some information about how it's good used. So about the zoning, about the potential number of students that might spend homes there. Just the kind of discussions we had when we did the redistricting for the south side of Hummertown. The planning and zoning folks came down and kind of talked to us about that, just so that we would have an idea about the consequences of that. Because if we do sell that property and it is, houses are built there and we have more students, then honestly, you would be looking at some redistricting from some neighborhoods right now that are going to Southside and Hummertown that would have to be redistricted to Northside and to Simmons. And so I think you'd want to have some of those, conversations up front.
I mean, this land, I haven't walked it. I walked it a few years ago. It's a nice path. That's all it is. I don't know if you've ever done it, like walk between them.
No, this is the first time it's really been on my radar when it came up as something for us to
We
vote
used
on.
to just walk it for fun. You might get an appraiser back there and they'll say, you can never build here. I mean, I really don't even know. So I think we just kind of be understanding what.
I think they build almost anything.
Well, I know. Well, that's true. But
Well, and with Mr. Hawkins sharing that he thinks we're facing redistricting anyway, this might be a great time to gather some additional knowledge.
okay. Is there any more discussion on this? We'll move on to the next item.
Item F is Ms. Smith authorized her to contract with Infinite Campus and Vanco Payment Solutions. This would offer us an online opportunity for parents to pay fees through Infinite Campus. And so I think that's been something that our folks have been wanting. And so now this would give us an opportunity for them to pay fees through Infinite Campus. Mr. Chenoweth has reviewed that contract and is favorable.
Was that attached to our agenda? I didn't see a lot. Okay.
It is.
I have a number of pages, actually.
Yep.
Item G is some changes to our preschool program. Currently, we operate half-day preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds. We do have a few tuition spots for both 3 and 4-year-olds right now. And then we also operate, it's called the PEP program, which is a wraparound. It's an afternoon program for students. It's a fee-based. It is a daycare that we operate. I think it serves about 15 students in the afternoon. We have reached a situation with our preschool program as our numbers have continued to grow that we don't have the space to be able to continue to offer the PEP program along with the preschool program that we are currently offering. And so what we are recommending is that we do away with PEP to give us an additional classroom in the afternoon to be able to serve additional preschool students. We are at, our numbers right now, actually as of a month ago, are at the same level as we ended last year. And we continue to screen and we continue to get new students in. And so in order to be able to accommodate all of the students who would qualify for preschool, we believe that we need to look at not offering PEP and freeing up an additional preschool classroom It would be at Simmons, that's where PEP is housed right now. And it would be so that we could take on those additional students for the 2021 school year.
So the PEP students currently are kiddos that come in the morning and do preschool and then spend the afternoon in more of a daycare type setting.
Correct.
Are they primarily like school employees' kids or?
No.
No, okay. And they pay like a different rate than the preschool rate for that program?
But unless they are a tuition student, their preschool's free.
Okay.
So, but they do pay basically a daycare rate for the afternoon daycare services.
Okay.
How many kids take advantage of PEP now?
15.
And would we be able to, so you would have, if you did it this way, you would have like a morning preschool and an afternoon preschool
Correct.
set?
And so the
And are kids allowed to do both?
The only ones that stay in the afternoon are in the PEP
Yeah.
program.
But by law, they can't.
do
They
both.
would- they have to pay for this.
There's no funding for that.
But we cut the PEP program and we didn't have that option.
And, sure.
Oh, yeah, please.
So if their parents can't arrange childcare, could they be a tuition student in the afternoon? No.
No, because of the required lunchtime and the breaks for staff that has to happen in that turnaround time in between the morning and afternoon sessions.
So right now, PEP fulfills that need for parents who send kids in the morning, but need something in the afternoon too, but we would be looking at doing away with that.
And there will be about 6, most of them will go on to kindergarten, so this will really affect about 6 children going into next year. And we just want to give this parents as much time as possible before next August.
So 9 of the 15 are going in, but of course, that's not going to be available for your new 3-year-olds. And again, is this a matter of space or staff?
Yes, space. We have 177 now. 2 years ago, we ended the year with 140.
Yeah.
There's been a steep increase in eligible children. And by law, we do not take waiting lists if they're eligible, we separate.
Well, I mean, that's good news, coupled with bad news.
Yes.
Because I know that kindergarten readiness is one of our big emphasis. I'm just sorry about the PEP, because I'm sure for so many parents, that's the first thing, even sending the kids to school.
We have a lot of collaboration with the daycares that are here in the town.
Yeah, and we provide transportation to those daycares,
Yes.
so if they can arrange something else, then that.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear about the big numbers, though.
Yeah. The next item is the preschool tuition, and this is another step to help us free up some additional space for our growth, is that we would no longer accept 3-year-old tuition and only do 4-year-old tuition students. That's not a large number of kids, but again, just trying to free up so that we can serve all of the students who qualify. And the reason that we've done with 3-year-olds is because those are typically your new qualifiers, and they can qualify at any point in time during the school year. So once they turn 3, if they qualify for preschool, then they are immediately placed.
Can you talk a little bit about the qualifications?
For 3-year-olds, it is primarily disability, and 4-year-olds is
disability, and 3-year-olds is disability, and 4-year-olds is disability, and income at 160% poverty level.
And when we talk about disability, we talk about speech, just,
Right.
it doesn't need to be a severe disability.
Any kind of
And again, this is a space issue.
right.
I mean, I think you guys have come up with a great, plan, but hopefully we can work to free up more space somewhere to accommodate all these, because again, this pre-K is just so critical.
Right.
So if we have to make a change like this, better to do the kids that aren't there yet.
Correct.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
let's start looking for more
It's
space.
our registration right in spring break, so. that's
Because I
why
think we
talked about
kind of
that.
feel proudly that even our tuition preschool is the way to go. So we don't want to cut that out for those kids.
Well, we're only part of it is because people are getting the words out and they know how important the early learning years are.
Yeah,
And we have a great quality program also.
right. So, okay.
So, and again, these are all due to increased numbers, and so.
And
we
lack of
want to be able to
space,
serve.
we gotta
Right.
find some space, so yeah, okay.
Item I is Explore Time Company fees. This is our after-school program that we offer to elementary students. And again, it's been a very successful program. We have not increased the fee schedule since 2013-14. And so we've been able to hold it flat for that length of time. But if you remember, last year or the year before, we did increase the salaries to be able to be more competitive for our ETC workers. And so we are recommending a slight increase. Kathy did do some analysis of districts around us. It still puts us on the low end of what other districts charge, moving from $158 to $170 a month, which is still a pretty good bargain for 4 hours of after-school childcare, 5 days a week for the entire school year. And so we are recommending that increase, and then also a move to, for people who are part-time, that they would pay for 3 days a week at a daily fee of $11 a day. And that is, again, to help us be able to staff appropriately, because with our after-school, with the daycare qualifications, we have to have a certain ratio of adults to students, and this allows us to staff more appropriately with that.
So I see, like, at the end of February, our balance in that daycare operation was $147,000. Do we remember what that is at the end of the year, usually?
Yes, last year it was 84,000, and we need to keep, and Amy can chime in, we have 2 months of expenses, 90% of our budget is staff, and they have, paychecks in June and July, and
Okay.
we don't have income coming in during that time. So we need 2 to 3 months worth of expenses balances to get correct. Yes.
Okay. I just didn't know what this, so we gave a raise before this increase.
Correct.
Yes, and
Is it
also
going to be
our,
possible to give them even maybe
Yes.
more of a raise for these workers after this increase?
well, there'll be step raises for experience, and there's also a 12% increase in retirement coming next year.
Oh, okay.
So we're just going to
Take it all. Yeah,
keep
never
up with
mind.
that. We've done some projections, and the balance will, if we keep where we are now, the balance will keep going down every year at the end of the year.
Okay. Do you have trouble finding employees?
Yes, because it is.
It's a tight job market.
Part-time, because they're part-time.
Right. Okay. Well, 158 to 170 doesn't sound too tough, so. I shouldn't say that. It is hard for some people.
Well,
I should
when
discuss
you,
that.
when you look at
It's a
4
bargain.
hours,
Yeah.
4 hours a day, I mean, they're getting 20 hours of childcare every week, so 80 hours a week for $170. That's-
Most places
that's
around
pretty
us
good.
are about almost that amount bi-monthly, twice a month. So it's a good price.
Okay.
You definitely hear that from parents too. I mean, I know I've got friends that use the program and they say that a lot, that it is quality time and that the rate is really affordable. So
All right, the next item is a BG4. and that is for the south side cafeteria kitchen addition that was completed. So this is the first of 2 closeout documents with that particular project. Item K is the BG5, and we are still waiting, I think, on KDE to get us that document back. So we're hopeful it'll be here. If it's not, then we'll certainly pull it off and add it for April. But that is the final closeout document on the security window project that we did. And then item L is recommendation to unrestricted funds.
That's one that I asked to be put on. I did have a quick question about that. If we do follow through and unrestrict those funds, would we also need to have a motion to rescind the BG1? Would that be required, Mr. Hawkins?
Maybe it would be, wouldn't it?
Okay. So I would ask that that be added to next week's agenda also, so that they both are there.
Do you have that?
Any questions about that one? All right. Item M is to, and I think this came through the forum, is that right? So SWOT analysis for the funding options.
Yes, I just thought that was a great idea at the forum. It was really one of the reasons I think the forum is such a good idea to have that community input. And so I'm just asking that we follow through with that and have SWOT analysis on each of the funding options. I think that's something probably Mr. Hawkins or Amy could lead.
Could you give us a detailed description of what a SWOT analysis is, Sherry?
Sure. A SWOT analysis is something that is conducted where you look at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats of a plan, so that before you invest a lot of time or money into a certain path, you understand exactly what that situation involves, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats.
Ms. Edelin, did we speak before at a previous meeting about having attached documents, supporting documents when an agenda item was added?
We did. And
There are two tonight. This one that Ms. Springate added to the agenda on Friday afternoon, as well as the Open Meetings Act complaint were both added, and neither one of them have any supporting documents. Are we not going to do that anymore, or
They were both added on
is that
Wednesday.
only when, are we not going to require that anymore?
Sherry, can you, I would like to have that on.
Yes. These were both added on Wednesday, as per our protocol. And again, there are no supporting documentations. A SWOT analysis just is what it is, and I'm asking that we have one. Just like with the agenda item we had earlier, really most of the agenda items that are added by board members, when Ms. Bradley asked that we have a appraisal for that property, there were no attachments.
You don't
So I
think that an
attachments-
analysis of what a SWOT
I think that-
analysis, like a document stating what a SWOT analysis is, would have been something that you would attach to that?
Well, I think you can look up what that is, but also in the question.
Well, we could look up a lot of
the person-
things.
The
What
person
about
that
the
asked the
open
question
access?
actually
Okay.
explained what the SWOT analysis was. So at the forum, when we were there.
Well,
when we
I
got
was
the
not
questions,
able to attend,
that
so it
was-
would have been nice to have the
That was one of the
attachment.
questions that was there. There is no attachment, is my answer, short answer.
Okay.
Ms. Evelyn, do you have
Thank you.
anything else?
No, if you have any more information on that, I don't know if there is a process, or if is it
I would
just
apply
those,
for
It's just
it's just
an
those
analysis.
acronyms?
It's just an analysis that any business or, private, public entity would want to do prior to investing in a long-term project, prior to investing in a costly project. That's just something that is done as a matter of course.
The document that Mr. Hawkins and Ms. Smith developed showing the pros and cons of all of the funding options.
Again, I just go back to this was a recommendation from the forum, and I believe when the question was asked, you actually said you were in favor of having a SWOT analysis. So I'm not really sure what all of the hostility is tonight, It's just a tool that we use where we're able to look at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats of any kind of major project. Again, it's something that's done just as a matter of course before you want to invest a lot of time and energy and money into a project. And I think that there's no cost to that Mr. Hawkins or Ms. Smith could lead us through that. And that's all I have to say about the SWOT analysis.
Just to clarify, I was not trying to be hostile.
It was
I
me,
mean,
but I
I was
was
just saying
She doesn't like to be
that
questioned.
after, I did absolutely say that I was open to that, but then after thinking about the pros and cons sheet, I think that hits most of those goals in a SWOT analysis. What do you think, Mr. Hawkins? Would you anticipate it being different than?
It could be. I mean, I think that was the work of our staff, and obviously we tried to anticipate anything that might be a benefit, might be a potential cost or a potential issue, but that doesn't mean that others wouldn't come out of a discussion with that. So
we anticipate this will be a discussion.
well, I mean, I think it would be a development of a document, at least the way I understand it.
Right, or
And-
maybe
and
just
so-
amend, or, because I do think those options are a good framework already.
I think it gives us a good starting point, but I don't know that that would be the end-all be-all in terms of having everything that might come out of a discussion with more people.
Okay, any more discussions on item M?
Who would be involved then, Mr. Hawkins? Because Ms. Springate had said you and Ms. Smith.
So I think she said that we would lead it, but I don't know who might need to be involved. I mean, obviously the board would be, but I don't know if anybody else would need to be a part of that discussion or not. I think that's for the board to decide.
Right. You going on?
Sure. Item N is to develop a written plan for all high school funding options.
Again, this was just something I asked to be placed on. I feel like it's something that should have probably been done a year ago. There needs to be a written plan. I think the community spoke at the March 3rd forum and clearly asked for a written plan. I think the board needs a written plan that really does kind of, share the plans for funding, the different options. And again, I just think that's just part of true good business. You should have a plan, you should understand the consequences, you should have an analysis, and we should be able to share that with the community. If there are no attachments, it would be a plan you develop.
Okay. Any further discussion on item N? Item O?
Item O is to set a date for the next forum.
I imagine that we can do that, given the current restrictions.
Unless we learn stuff about Facebook Live forums or.
Yeah, I think it might be something we could do through a streaming, might be a viable option. I think it's important that we answer the questions, the remaining questions that were given to us at the forum. We have committed to doing that, that's something we should do. And then the other thing is, I think it's important to share, the results of that forum, that information, and to get that public input. But I do think in light of the COVID-19 outbreak, that might be something we could look at, maybe doing some kind of a live streaming forum. And I would think that it would be good if we could look at our calendars and find something possibly after spring break, and we could go ahead and get that scheduled.
Yeah, let's wait till next week and see what happens in a week, with all of this.
Yeah.
But we can set a date next week, and we can look at that. And we talked a little bit about even having a virtual meeting, so we're going to be checking in on kind of some of those things this week, so we should have more information about all that. If you use any information you want to get, if you could gather it as far as having a virtual forum and bring it to us, I would appreciate it too. I don't know if it just be a Facebook Live. I've been hesitant about Facebook because not everybody has Facebook, and I want them to have to be on Facebook to participate.
Probably be something that Mr. Gibson could kind of discuss with us and help us with, how to actually do that, a live stream meeting. And then I also think that at that forum, as part of that forum, we need to share out the results of the survey that we had. We had a survey of, I think, over 100 respondents, and 0 thought that using our general fund money for option 1 was a good option. 0 thought that using our general fund money for option 2 is a good option. And those are the options that we're currently pursuing, using general fund money for the high school. The majority chose other options. So I think we need to share that information out also as part of that.
And it may be possible with a virtual forum where people who couldn't attend could fill that out too. We could get more input on that.
I think we should be open to getting
Okay.
information from the public for sure, and sharing information with the public, absolutely.
All right. Any more discussion on item O?
No, and again, there's no attachment, it's just literally setting a date for the forum.
But hopefully we'll have some, maybe Bob can have some ideas for us, I guess.
We're checking on some.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
Item P is creation of a lead team to research and provide recommendations for high school funding options.
Again, this was just something that came from the forum. I thought it was a great idea. It's kind of beginning at the beginning of the process, starting and kind of trying to make a plan before, we spend $50 million plus. I think that if the board chooses to unrestrict the funds and rescind the current BG1, that there's the creation of this lead team comprised of students, parents, district staff, board members, government officials, business leaders, and community members would be a real appropriate way to bring all the stakeholders to the table and to allow them to bring information to us and ideas to us as a board so that we could have a means of moving forward. Again, no attachments, it's just a lead team.
That sounds very similar to the steering committee. As far as the makeup, we had government leaders, we had students, we had parents, we had teachers, we had administrators. And the way that kind of progressed was that it got to the point that the funding discussions were moot because that's a board decision. And so kind of all of the other things that you've identified that they would do at the beginning of the process did happen at the beginning of the process, just to be transparent in that.
Well, to be transparent, the steering committee had a totally different charge, which I'm not really clear on what that charge was, but it had to do with some phase construction and some actual plans of a high school. What I'm saying is this group would look at, they would back up to the beginning, and they would say, first of all, is this moving forward with the high school something we want to do? And if it is, then they would look at different options of funding first, because I think it's important that you get your funding down first and you decide how to progress with that. Once that's established and once you've gotten your funding in place, then they would make recommendations. So it wouldn't be recommendations about if we would have the bathroom on floor 1 or the bathroom on floor 2. It wouldn't be recommendations about, do you like this phase building that I've designed, or do you not like this phase building that I designed? It would literally be backing the process all the way up to the beginning and involving the community with the essential first question of, is this something we want to do? Is now the right time? And if so, what are some ideas about how to fund that? Once the funding is in place, then you can move forward with discussions about design later. So it wouldn't actually be the steering committee. That was all about the phase design and the design. So it wouldn't be anything about the phase design. It wouldn't be anything about the design whatsoever. So something more kind of a planning, foundational kind of piece.
And just to be clear, I understand that you don't believe in the funding mechanism that has been chosen by the board, but the funding is in place. That is
Not for a $50 million high school, which is what the schematic is designed for. So there are some real issues there.
I'm just saying, we have a funded BG1 that
Led to $1 million deficit in fiscal year 19.
I understand. I'm just saying,
Over $1
board
million
action has
deficit.
already been taken to do this. And
Not for the
I think-
design, the steering
Okay, let her
committee.
finish. Let her finish.
I think that you have to be very clear if you do form this group in saying, this has already been voted on by the board. The action is already in place. The BG1 has already been submitted. You're now going to go back to a stage that we are already past.
We never
And-
started at this stage. We never went through that stage whatsoever is what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is let's go back and do it right. I understand what you're saying. We voted on an EG1, but there is no design for a $36 million school. So we voted on that, but there's no design for that. There's
Yes,
a
there
design
is.
for a $50 million
There's
school.
both.
$50+ million school. So
There are-
what I'm saying is we're at a point where the VG1 is not sufficient for what your schematic is. It's not. So there are going to have to be changes in the amount. And what I'm saying is if we're making changes in that amount, we're discussing how to move forward at this point, then I'm saying don't move forward and add 15, 20, 30 more million dollars into that pot. Let's take a step back, start at the beginning, involve the community, and really look at the different options and the consequences. Because where we are right now is with deficit spending that cannot continue. So we've got a BG1, but we can't pay for it. We've got a BG1, but we can't afford to pay our bills now with that money taken out set aside for that BG1. So what I'm saying, even in my earlier motion is, let's unrestrict that money. Let's make our budget whole. Let's pay our bills. Let's make sure that we are on a balanced field, especially with the COVID-19 crisis, pandemic, especially with not knowing what the state budget is, especially knowing that we are operating at a deficit. $1 million deficit in year one, $1 million more this year, and we're looking at 1.8 next year if we don't address this. I'm saying let's address this now, and then let's start fresh. That's what that motion is about.
Any further discussion?
Absolutely.
Okay. Item Q is mine. I did have some attachments. Did people get attachments to this? Okay. I had sent, just kind of to refresh the memory.
I got an email, Ms. Elam, but I did not know to attach what was there. It was just email confirmation.
Okay, well, I had sent some attachments, so maybe I'll talk to you afterwards and make sure everybody gets them. I didn't really have anything. I was just reminding, I just sent what we had accumulated last year, just it's kind of a refresher on this issue. Ms. Smith informed me that we have paid the sheriff $360,000 this year for, to date, for collection costs. When you look at the expenses that she had been able to gather last year, that was again way and above those expenses for 5 months or more, and assuming that every minute and every employee was only used for tax collection. So I wanted to look at it again. I do realize that last year I was unsuccessful in lowering that to 1.5%, and I certainly stand behind the majority of the board for, that I was in the minority, but I stand behind that vote for this year. We mentioned looking at it, and I think it was my suggestion every 2 years, but I felt that was at a minimum, and because our assessments have gone up so much, and consequently our fees have gone up so much, that I would like to work with Mr. Chenoweth to maybe send another letter to the sheriff, because when we did go through trying to ascertain their expenses last year, we did let them know that we really hoped, Amy had to go in and get that from them, and that they would keep a better accounting this year, so to at least see if they've done that, and at least see what they say their expenses are. So I'm just asking the board to give me authorization to talk to Mr. Chenoweth about that, to possibly draft a letter. So you can all think about that. Angel, I'll make sure that we're clear on that. So you should be getting the documentation that I had sent her hopefully tomorrow or the next day before our meeting next Monday. So does anybody have any questions for me or discussion about this?
Ms. Eklund, is that something we can revisit every year, or is there a time?
Well, I don't know that there's a rule. I did say, like I said, last year, I hope we do it at least every 2 years. My thought wasn't, we won't do it for 2 years. It was, let's at least do it every 2 years. It went up so drastically this year because our assessments went up so much. And I assume they'll stay similar next year, that I would like to go ahead and look at it this year again. I think I had kind of said that because it had been years since we've looked at it, and where it had been set at 2.5%, and maybe when it was set at 2.5%, it was reasonable, and it was their expenses, but because we didn't look at it for so many years, and our assessments went up so high, that all of a sudden it really wasn't, because as Mr. Chinholm explained to us, we are required to pay the sheriff his actual expenses and no more. And that in fact, I think he'd even used the word, you know, we're not really allowed to pay more than that because we can't use school funds to profit other government entities. So.
Well, I would just say that I think our sheriff does a really good job. We have a 97-98% collection rate. And I think just looking at this every year just really is almost counterproductive. I think in the relationship, number one, but also just in the costs with the attorney and then just the time. So I'm not actually in favor of this, and those are my reasons. And
Okay. Well, then you can vote against. We'll vote on it next week. Yeah, sure. I think that, and I did some algebra on this, Amy, and I didn't clear it with Amy before, but had we had a 1.5% rate this year, which is the lowest allowed statutorily, we would have saved $90,000. So attorney's fees are costly, but that's a lot of money too. So.
Too, that given how recently we talked about it, I think that the chances that they will have captured their costs better this year are much better.
Right.
You know, I think that knowing that this is going to be something that we look at, I don't think it's nearly as hard for them to try and go back and look at it retroactively. I'm hopeful that they kept a running.
So anyway, that's mine, and you'll be getting more, just a refresher memory from last year.
And I would just say, I don't think that they had a flaw in record keeping as much as they just gave us the number they felt like that's what their costs were, that what their cost to do this for us was. So I think, I know there's a difference of opinion in that, but I do feel like they do a fabulous job, and I do feel like that, you know, we don't want to have a perception out there that we're trying to nickel and dime everybody in the community so that we can save to take money out of our general fund to build a high school. I don't think that's a good perception. And I do think when they submitted their expenses, that when we looked through them, that we all came up with that kind of compromise, and we did just lower that last year. So I think that, you know, in good faith, we said we would look at that every few years, and to look at it every year, you know, really isn't following what we said we would do. But again, I'm just having discussion, just saying my thoughts.
Sure. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Come to the end of our. We had 2 discussion items. We did talk to Ryan a little bit. I do just want to say about the Cultural Intelligence Assessment Interpretation Workshop. Ryan's done a great job on this, and I hope it can go forward as planned without too much disruption in the schedule. So, is there anything else you want to discuss with us on that, or anything else? I think we kind of covered it during your presentation. So. Okay, thank you, Ryan. And then Ms. Springate had an Open Meetings Act complaint for discussion. This is documentation. Okay.
And I think that when I just want to speak about it, and when I get to the bottom, you'll
Okay.
understand why I can only present it to you tonight. There's a specific reason, and it has to do with statutory timelines.
Okay.
So, I just want to say, as a second-term Woodford County Public School Board member, I am saddened to have to submit the following complaint outlining numerous open meeting violations over the past year by our current Board of Education. Throughout my tenure, our district has demonstrated continuous progress in all areas, making my service an extremely rewarding experience. The collaborative efforts of the Woodford County Board of Education have been paramount in the district's success. Sadly, over the past 15 months, since January 2019, these collaborative efforts are no longer present. As a result of the board's division, ethical standards, district policies, and state statutes are often violated. Regrettably, the board's questionable actions are not isolated incidents. Rather, it has become a pattern of behavior impeding the focus of the most important thing, our students. School districts thrive when a board conducts itself as a cohesive team in the atmosphere of mutual respect and trust. Unfortunately, a majority of the board is now privately having conversations and discussions to secure votes on important matters in advance of public meetings, and/or individual board members are acting on behalf of the board without official authorization. I understand that I'm often in the minority, but my legal right to participate in the decision-making process, this process cannot be denied. This intentional exclusion continues to hinder my ability to fully represent my constituents. My goal in submitting this complaint is to restore ethical governance and lawful decision-making to the Woodford County Board of Education. I have shared my concerns on multiple occasions with the chair and in open meetings, yet no changes have occurred. Additionally, on October 21st, 2019, I made a motion requesting the Kentucky School Board Association provide additional training on appropriate behavior during school board meetings and on the roles and responsibilities of school board members. Unfortunately, my motion died without a second. I have been left with no alternative than lodging this formal complaint detailing the many open meeting violations that have occurred over the past year. This board's problematic behavior is vast and extends far beyond the open meeting violations, but my priority at this time is to bring transparency and inclusion back to the board's operating procedures. As a fair remedy has been provided with each complaint, and I look forward to working with the board to determine a response within 3 business days. My hope is that this complaint will yield a positive result. However, if the violations are not acknowledged and the remedies are rejected, I am prepared to file this with the Attorney General.
Okay. So you're expecting a response from the rest of us as a board within 3 days?
I think that's just statute. Once it's delivered to you.
Can you give me the KRS?
It's on the Attorney General website.
Do you feel we need to have a special meeting to address this within that time?
Obviously.
Whatever you decide to do. I just want to be involved in discussions with the attorney and in discussions with the other board members.
Have you shared this with Mr. Chenoweth?
No, I haven't.
Well, I think this is something that we need to get to Mr. Chenoweth forthwith. I will send it to him in the morning. And he or I will be in, after 3 days, it's going to be difficult.
I understand, which is why in my KSBA training, they said that you should serve it on the board at a meeting, basically, so that that time frame starts once it's served.
Okay. I'll get in touch with you tomorrow about it after I talk to Chenoweth. Would you like to talk to him with me? We'll see. We'll talk about it. Okay. Anything else? Anybody, any discussion about this?
No, I'd like time to read it and then we'll discuss it.
Let's see. That's that.
Can we just wait?
Pardon?
Can you not?
You want to wait till we read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it would nice, like I said, it would have been nice to get it before the meeting. Especially given that this is the only time we have to meet and comply with the 3-day time frame. Sherry, did you prepare all of this?
I did, but I don't really want to discuss it. I mean, I think it would be best probably if it were discussed with the attorney first. It's up to the chair. I mean, I don't mind the chair's preference. I thought she had wanted to discuss it with Mr. Chenoweth first, but that's not the case.
I just think it bears mentioning that you make allegations of violations by everyone on the board and Mr. Hawkins, and nothing that you have done is in violation.
I think if you read through it, you'll see that that's not the case. There have been violations and remedies suggested. However, I do think that it's my complaint, and when I fill out my complaint, I didn't do an exhaustive list. I just did a list of the things that I had documentation on that came to mind. I think certainly other people may have other violations out there. I know there's one that some community members brought to my attention regarding the forum. So I think there are definitely other things still out there. This is just an attempt to get the board back on track and to stop the bad behavior. And again, I feel like I have attempted to address it in every way possible, in person, face-to-face, in meetings, with requests for training. At this point, I didn't feel like I had any other option.
Do you feel like you've tried to work as a cohesive board as well, Sherry? Or do you feel like that because you're the outsider, so you say, that we're not coming to terms with you? Is that, because that's the way I feel about it.
I feel like if you read through the violations, at no point does it say, I feel like I'm an outsider.
It says that on the front page of it, that you're...
I don't feel like I'm an outsider. I feel like I'm part of this board. I feel like that we can have different opinions, but we can't behave in ways that are illegal or unethical. That's my
So, on number 9, the chair has the responsibility of setting the agenda for our meetings. It says, it almost appears like I acted independent in securing a moderator.
Again, I think the allegations speak for themselves.
Okay,
The
I'm going to
policies
address
speak
this for just a
themselves.
second. In her capacity as the chair, she asked me to reach out to KSBA and ask if they have recommendations for a moderator. I did that, but this very much reads like Vice Chair Bradley had secured a moderator. The board did not authorize Mrs. Bradley to secure a moderator. So that's kind of a misrepresentation. The chair sets the agenda.
It's an actual factual representation. The board did not authorize you to do that.
The chair sets the agenda for the meetings.
Again, I think if you read through the policy and you read through the allegations, they're very factual and they can be
This is
substantiated by
absolutely
meetings.
not factual.
The board
And
did not
KSBA
authorize.
confirmed that the chair has the ability to set the agenda and that the chair was well within her scope in deciding on written question submission. In fact, it's a best practice recommendation for public forums.
I
And
think you'll have to consult with Mr. Chenoweth to see if your interpretation or my interpretation is correct. They're clearly differing interpretations. And so I think the final arbitrator is the Attorney General of Kentucky. So I don't know what us sitting here in front of the public going back and forth during this meeting, I don't know how productive that is. I think it probably further creates division and animosity, and I don't think it's productive. I think that Ms. Evelyn's recommendation that she speak with Mr. Chenoweth and involve all of us or me, a special meeting, any of those things, are good options. But simply sitting here saying, you wrote something I don't agree with, and me saying, well, that's what I believe, is not productive.
Ms. Eaglin, did we ever receive the transcripts or detail of the conversation between Ms. Springate and Mr. Salisbury that you requested a while back about her lengthy conversation with Mr. Salisbury?
No. I just want to be clear too. Well, the issue here, Sherry, is the 3 days. I mean, I've had trouble even getting a hold of Mr. Chenoweth for 2 days.
It's not my deadline, honestly, it's not.
Well, then,
Well, it's going to require expense in contacting Mr. Chenoweth and then in having an emergency meeting within the next 3 days to act as a board.
I do have a question too. On the last page, so that's about the extra $350. Is part of the problem that you have me voting yay and nay?
Yeah, that is why I asked to be prepared.
Because you said that the names are handwritten.
Well, you are absolutely, I think, a no vote on that one, so we can mark you up.
So that was just a typo? I think you meant to say Wilson in the yay. I think it's just a typo.
Thank you.
No, I do think we need to send this to Mr. Chenoweth. Sherry, I'll be in touch with you in the morning after I get home with Liz Nicole, I will tell you. But I will send it to him if he feels, and I will share with you what he says unless you want to be on the call. And then we'll see if we need to set a meeting or how we're going to go forward with this. I'll also see what he says about the 3 days, if there's a possibility of this.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Do we have any reason for executive session? All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?